What's up, Internet?
Jordan here from Arrow to the Mead, and today I'm going to be giving you the rundown on a 1-year-old bottle I just opened of my first ever mead, a Cranapple Cyser. Let's get to it. So I actually did 2 tastings here. One I did by myself with the Cyser at room temperature, and a second I did with my wife where the Cyser had actually been refrigerated, so it was chilled. But before I get too far into the tasting notes themselves, let's take a look at the recipe real quick. 3 quarts of mixed apple and cranberry juice, probably about 75% apple. 3 pounds of honey. 125 grams of craisins were used in secondary. I used a half packet of Lalvin 71B yeast. The original gravity was about 1.160. The final gravity was about 1050. And the estimated ABV is just under 13%. As far as process goes, keep in mind this is my first ever mead. But an attempt was made. While I didn't have a full spread of proper nutrition, including diammonium phosphate, formate K, and stuff like that, I did use boiled yeast, so it wasn't left entirely to its own devices. Fermentation wasn't too bad, but it wasn't super clean either. When this was young, it definitely had a lot of alcohol heat, quite a bit of young apple heat, and frankly, probably a little bit of fusel in there as well. It wasn't full-blown rocket fuel by any means, and the high final gravity around 1050, which is pretty much the same as apple juice by itself, just for a reference point, made it reasonably drinkable, but I could definitely tell that it was going to benefit significantly from age. And that brings us to today, a year after bottling, and I didn't do a long secondary, so it's only about 13 months from pitch. On my room temperature taste test, the first and most obvious thing I noticed was how much smoother and just easier to drink it had become. Like I said, the relatively high final gravity made it acceptable when it was young, but now that it had had time to age and round out, it was almost like you could actually enjoy that residual sweetness instead of relying on it to cover up some homebrew sins and youngness. That said, I almost felt like it tasted more like a traditional than a Cyser. It was kind of weird. I mean, there was definitely apple in there, don't get me wrong, but I felt like the honey aromatics and flavors were far more forward to me than the apple, which sort of took a back seat. Curiously, my wife felt like there was plenty of apple in there and didn't really have the same complaint. In my partial defense, I actually do feel that the chilled version tasted a little bit more apple forward than the room temperature version, but I'm not sure if that's actually just inherently true about this beverage or if that might have something to do with my previous tasting experiences. See, I haven't had a whole lot of other Cysers, but I have had a decent number of ciders. So I'm not used to picking up the fermented apple flavor in a room temperature, still, and wine strength beverage. I'm used to picking it up in a more refrigerated, carbonated, and beer strength beverage. So maybe refrigerating this mead brought the temperature part a little bit closer to a normal cider, made it present a little bit more like a cider, and my brain just had an easier time parsing out the, oh yeah, that's fermented apple, we know what that is. Just a theory, not really sure, but I will say that my wife is a sensory expert in the beer industry, so if you have to go with her word or mine, probably go with hers. As far as the cranberry flavor goes, it did not survive. There's a hint of it left in the color, but it has changed and faded a bit. Whereas when this was young, it had kind of a red-pink color. Now it's more like a pink amber. Now, I couldn't tell you for sure whether the cranberry impacted the balance of this mead, for better or for worse, without running some sort of side-by-side comparison between this and, well, basically the same thing, but without the cranberries. But there wasn't any sort of identifiable cranberry flavor or aroma left in this anywhere. Not in the nose, the palate, the exhale, it's completely gone. It's just a hint of color and that's all that survived. So the overall verdict, well, it's quite palatable, dangerously drinkable even, especially the chilled version. But personally, I don't want to judge my brews based solely on the one-dimensional question of whether or not it's good. I want to analyze if I had control over the brew. Was I able to choose ingredients and influence fermentation in such a way that the end product is at least close to, if not exactly, what I had in mind when I assembled the recipe? And in this case, the answer is a resounding no. This is not what I was going for. And I'm super excited that it tastes good, but it's not what I was trying to brew. So what does that mean? Well, there's a couple lessons here, I think. If you're a prospective home brewer and you're debating whether or not to try and break into the hobby and start picking up some of the equipment, this does reinforce the old adage that time heals all brews. or at least most of them. It also demonstrates that coming up with your own recipes when you have no experience or anything to go off of and you're just kind of making stuff up might not get you the best results. I got lucky in the sense that this actually turned out to be a very pleasant beverage, but knowing that it didn't turn out the way I wanted, if I'd picked different combination of ingredients, this could have gone south very easily. Personally, that's a risk I am willing to take because it's part of how I learn. The pedagogy of just getting out there and doing the thing, even if it crashes and burns, is integral to how I learn. So I not only accept these risks, but I willingly and happily embrace them. But you, what do you want out of your brew? Why are you brewing? Are you like me in that the process itself is a huge part of the fun for you? The learning and the brewing and the experimenting? Or are you focused on the end product? Are you looking for the highest chances that you can guarantee a not only drinkable end product, but to have the end product turn out the way you had it in your head? What are you looking for? If your focus is on that end product, I strongly recommend that you use someone else's recipe, especially while you're still new. Find a reputable source, and ideally, if you can, find one that actually talks about how they brew their recipes multiple times before formally posting and publishing them, like doing the most, so that you know that's a well-vetted recipe and not just a recipe for the sake of getting content out there. Don't waste your time and energy on a bunch of trial and error if that's not what you find fun about the hobby and other people have already put all that work in for you. But if you're all about the process and the learning and the experimenting and you don't mind people occasionally thinking that you're a mad scientist, then by all means, go for it. Come up with an insane recipe, some crazy combination, and see if you can make it work, as long as you accept the risks that it might not turn out quite the way you're hoping for. I guess my soapbox here today is to spend a little bit of time on introspection, asking yourself why you are brewing in the first place. What draws you to this hobby? What part of it do you find fun? I think once you understand that, you can make much more focused and educated decisions about pursuing the hobby in a way that brings you joy. I'm not sure what percentage of this video actually ended up being tasting notes, but, well, thanks for stopping by and have a good however long until I see you again. 'Cause I'm still looking